All right, today I am joined by Drixel, also known as Trevor McAleese, and Trevor is the artist behind all the art in the Doors of Trithius. So he's joining me today to talk about the art, the pixel art, yeah, all the imagery and art going into the Doors of Trithius. So welcome, Trevor.
Yeah. Uh, hey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
And we're so what are we looking at here? We're looking at your Photoshop. This is where you do your editing, I'm assuming.
Yeah, this is my sort of art tool of choice. I just have open right here, just sort of my kind of like mock-up scene PST for all of the temple art. So I've got everything just sort of kind of well organized, but my naming structure is maybe a little bit indecipherable for anyone that's not me. But from here, basically, I've just kind of like created like a representative environment to be able to kind of like plop art into, and it just makes things a little bit easier as far as like making sure
Oh
that stuff
wow.
is like looking right, and I can like test animation. I've got things sort of set up here, but uh yeah, I mean, obviously there is a lot of stuff that's present in the Doors of Trithius, in the way of like sprites and background tiles and all that kind of stuff,
A huge
equipment and UI.
a huge amount of art. Let me just say that, yeah, like the amount of art you made with this game, man, it's like we've got textures, we've got over 50 creatures now. It's a massive amount. I've actually never seen it open in Photoshop like this. This is actually pretty cool. I've never got to see your workplace. That's a lot of layers, and even the animations playing.
Yeah, which is probably gonna muck things up a little bit. I'm just gonna turn things off here, but in fact, I've kind of like made a bit of a mess. Um, but yeah, I mean, lots of well, I mean, for any fantasy RPG worth its weight, there's got to be art for everything to sort of sell the whole package. And yeah, I mean, as we were sort of discussing prior to this little chit chat, one of the sort of the big challenges, kind of like getting things going with the game, was really just kind of like settling on the art style. Because I mean, like it's been like about 2 years now that I've been sort of associated with you on this project, and things definitely didn't quite look like this
No.
the start.
And you can really see, like, those who've seen the start, and maybe we'll look at some of those images later, how far it's come to kind of settle in on this look for the Doors of Trithius here. Yeah, this is a temple we're looking at. This is one of the later ones. It became a little darker. The monsters and the style started to have a feel. Um, yeah, it has come. It has come a long way, and it was hard. I remember trying to agree on a look for the Doors of Trithius. A lot. Like I kind of had some. I knew I kind of wanted it darker, but we also wanted some unique colors. We were looking at some pinks and some cyans.
Yeah, definitely. And there were some references that you had pulled up early on that really had sort of like a stark kind of like color palette, sort of minimalist and like really cool looking, dark backdrop stuff that popped out really clearly. And actually, what? I'm just going to bring up some of that early stuff. Why the heck not? Actually, I had it all organized here. Let's go way back.
Nice. Literally
Um,
go back in time and into the task. There we go. I remember this
yeah.
one.
Oh yeah.
I still
So
love
actually,
it.
oh, here we
Look at
go.
that. I love it.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, this was also like using like sort of like a smaller tile size. This was based on like 16 by 16 tiles, but just trying to like establish the very basics. Like how a dungeon could look. Because after all, this was sort of uh almost in a way kind of like based on some of the stuff that uh had come to be in the previous sort of unreleased game that you had been sort of
Yeah.
cooking up years ago, Space Explorer,
Where we
sort of
first
using
met.
this similar kind of idea with like these tall walls, kind of this forced perspective. um and we could look at that in a little bit here. But as far as getting like the general kind of like interiors of the dungeons looking right and all that, it did take a little bit of experimentation, but it was good. Oh, just I've
I
got some
love the
things.
retro look of this. I mean, it didn't quite work. This isn't quite the look of the final game. And there we go. We see sort of the transition where the previous one, that black floor is so cool. But like as we talked about, it caused some issues with contrast and seeing where shadows were, and we couldn't quite make it work. Um, okay, so was this the next step here? This one then?
Yeah, actually, there were like a whole bunch of
Mm.
sort of iterations until finally kind of arriving on what is still in place as like the your basic kind of like castle art. Eventually deciding that the ground would get like more of sort of like a solid color, and obviously the walls just sort of keep kind of advancing until it
I
all
still
sort of
love
fades away into darkness.
I still love the look of these walls. The bright blue, almost like these neonish colors. I think they really stand out, but we didn't end up using it for every dungeon, and it actually gave it that castle, what today became one of the dungeons. It gave it its unique look, which is still, yeah, this is very much Doors of Trithius right here. The only thing might be the items on the ground, which we don't have that in the latest version.
Yeah, but otherwise, the other art is more or less sort of, it's in use in one form or another. But yeah, I mean, the sort of the original dungeons are kind of in need of maybe a bit of a second pass now to kind
Yeah.
of get them more in line with the rest of the look of the game. But gotta start somewhere, especially since the outdoor environments really kind of like took on like a different sort of a vibe. It's it's
Yeah, they
time to
did.
kind of go back and
Yeah, I've been
make
feeling
the
that too.
castles.
It's on the roadmap. We're gonna upgrade these castles for sure. Even those cobwebs, I love little details. Just people know sometimes Trevor will give me lots of details, and I don't have the time or the will to add them yet, but they are coming. Often the scenes lose a thing or two sometimes as I program them, but I love like the little webs and cracks in the floor and the details that you add. So many little things make a great scene.
Yeah, but it's kind of a pain to
It is.
actually implement all these little assets. Um,
And I love the item on the
but
table in this. Something about that just excites me. Like in a fantasy world, like there's a piece of paper waiting, and we realized it was too much to make an object on the ground for everything. But I think for some quests to have something on the table like that, that's going to be great. I think we can pull that off. That'll be awesome. You go up to the table and there's a like the next step in the quest.
yeah, yeah, it's just sort of like it's begging to be interacted with,
Yeah,
and you've got like a page like that. But one of the things that also really took like a while to kind of get settled was really the look of your avatar, sort of your basic kind of character sprite. And this was just like an
Mhm.
early little test to kind of like just cram some
Just to
sprites from
see.
like other games in here. Just
Yeah,
trying to like figure out like proportions that worked, sort of more kind of like chibi, more just sort of like long and lanky.
and I think
And
the really cool thing about this is people they see the current character and you assume, oh, it had to be that. Like once something works, it looks like it just has to be that. But you look at these other characters, you see how far and how many things we were trying to get it right. Like how different this guy looks. Very different sort of look. Um,
yeah, but sort of you can kind of see how this evolved into the character sprite that we all kind of recognize now in the game. And this
yeah,
was kind of like the real shift, sort of removing kind of like the outline, really kind of like making the whole thing sort of a little bit more, almost kind of more painterly and a little more abstract looking,
yeah.
less kind of less comic.
Without the look of the eyes, it really does give it like a darker look. It's like there's something you can't quite see. And I'll give credit to Joel for that one in the early days, really helping give a lot of feedback on the art. And I think that might have been one of his suggestions to go for a darker look there. So
Yeah, he was definitely pushing for that, and I think it was
I
the
think he
right
was right on. He was,
choice.
yeah, he was spot on.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, this is the first island. So this is this is our first. Look at how big the world is today. And this was the original mock-up where
yeah,
I'm like Trevor, we need an island. We need some grass. We need to look
yeah,
like a space. I
yeah.
love it. And that dark water.
Yeah, I mean, like basically, really, it was the overworld art that kind of like sort of set the template for how like the outdoor environments would actually look when you're exploring them. Sort of making
Mm.
these things feel like they're kind of connected. And I honestly, I think the overworld art is like some of the most fun stuff that there's been to sort of work on in the game so far. It's fun. It's almost like it's almost like building sort of like landscapes for like like Warhammer armies to fight on. It's just the
Because it's
sort of the
all on
sense of kind
black.
of the miniaturization.
And it's great because you play a fantasy game, you expect the maps to sort of have that bright green, cheery look, the fantasy forest music playing, and I think that's you immediately notice the difference in tone with the Doors of Trithius when you see the overworld. You're like, oh, the world has this darkness in it, and it isn't necessarily like horror or goth, but there's this element you can feel it. And I think it just works so well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely moody, and
It's definitely moody.
especially since it feels like really really dark, and I think that's much to its benefit. Sort of the early stuff for the forests, kind of paved the way for the early stuff for the towns, and the buildings obviously have changed a heck of a lot since these early mock-ups were experimenting with the idea of having actual roofs,
We still might use that.
and these
That's
sort of like skinnier.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah,
a
I mean,
fantastic looking roof. I almost feel bad looking at it now. It looks really good.
well,
Bad that we don't have
it's.
it.
I mean, it could be brought back in in one form or another as just like some other piece of decoration, maybe that's not necessarily the roof of a building, but the walls and all this. This ultimately ended up being like too complicated because they don't occupy like sort of a full tile, and it's just like a big sort of mess from sort of a tiling complexity, and then eventually settling on building walls that are a bit thicker, and this was sort of like an early very kind of cluttered mock-up of like the Druid village. But
Yeah, that was a big
while
step.
I do, yeah, I mean it was
wall.
quite the jump. But I mean I do really like how these walls look, but from sort of like a more just the sheer functionality of these, the fact that it conforms to like the previous format that we've already kind of established for for like the tiling and such. It's worth it. And again, almost everything in the game kind of like follows that same sort of tiling pattern, and it just makes it, at this point, having established all these sorts of kind of like standards, making new art is a lot less of a puzzle. It's just sort of like having all of these examples to go off of, having all of these formats that are working. It's a lot faster now to sort of make things happen. We're sort of in the Goldilocks zone of development now.
Yeah, it feels like there's a momentum of flow because we know our outsides are kind of dark. We kind of have an idea of what they need to map onto, and we can try out previous art. I know when we're doing like a new scene, we can throw on like a tree or something and already get a feeling. But that getting started was definitely the hard part. We were figuring out the walls, the look of the character, the just the whole vibe of the world. And this is one that just came in the last update, the mountain biome, which I'm so happy with. This is pretty new for the outdoor zone. We hadn't done this where there are these walls and a height map, so you can actually go higher or down up the mountain area.
Yeah, I've played the latest update a bit, and it's definitely a fun new biome to explore. I mean, it makes me excited to think about what sort of new things could be introduced in like deserts and swamps, especially since sort of that height map generation you've got going works really well for making like an interesting natural environment that sort of has this illusion of of sort of depth to navigate through.
And I think every time we do one of these, it's like we get more excited for the next one, and we get more ideas. And we realize what we're capable of. I feel the same way, like swamps or deserts coming up next. What we'll be able to use. There was some really cool art, I think, and features in this one, especially that it's not. I don't know if this isn't an animated image, but that in the center, that water was like a bubbling hot spring. Looks so good with the smoke coming out, and that creepy snake rock. It's just, I love it. It's like you see the snake rock, and you're the player's like, what do I do? Do I click it? Do I go up to it? And it's got like eyes. Yeah, look at that.
Yeah,
and this I think is like 6 frames. You did this smoking.
Yeah,
which is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't take too much animation to actually kind of make something feel a bit more alive. Let's see if I've got that snake rock here. Snake base. There we go. Oh yeah, so this eerie. I mean, it is pretty fun. Also, the fact that you've got it set up where you loot the snake rock, and then all of a sudden, you have a high probability of spawning a bunch of venomous snakes that then spring out, which is makes sense. Your shenanigans have a consequence.
For sure, and like I love the little eyes poking out. It's like a hint.
Yeah, that's right. This is an inhabited rock. But like one of the other sort of new environments, or new-ish rather, these abandoned temples, and like the factory floor especially. This was like a good opportunity to kind of like repurpose some of that earlier Space Explorer art, although not entirely all of it made the jump, but stuff like this broken energy node and some of these other details, like like this hunter bot. Actually, let's see. I'll bring up the
just to clarify. I mean, we kind of mentioned earlier. Trevor and I had worked on a game and never quite got finished, and that was a spaceship game where it was kind of like an RPG, but it was inside a spaceship. And he had done a lot of fantastic art for that, and I never finished that project. But some of this we were able to reuse for the Doors of Trithius. So here we're looking at the main character from Space Explorer.
Yeah, and obviously a much different approach than the Doors of Trithius, where you've got just sort of like a static sprite that changes kind of poses based on sort of the context of the weapon that they're carrying. And this though obviously was a much more sort of straight up like action game as far as like the the gameplay was concerned. Like you sort of mouse aiming and like keyboard movement and stuff running around in real time. So, this was like kind of a complicated construction in that, you've got like a sprite that can look in 8 directions and move in 8 directions and has like, sort of an armed state and like a relaxed state. But the game itself, I think in a certain way, it bears a bit of a resemblance to even the Doors of what the Doors of Trithius has become.
Absolutely.
Especially as far as like sort of I don't know, it's sort of like the depth of kind of like the menu and kind of like character customization.
Yeah, that it actually is real. It's kind of nostalgic seeing it there. I think it was that, though you were saying like an 8-directional movement, that really was what made it too hard. I think the live action combat, like everything free moving, and that makes just as a programmer a much more big of a challenge. So the Doors of Trithius being a roguelike was like that exact perfect level of difficulty to be able to get all the depth in, all the RPG mechanics. But in terms of the graphics and rendering and combat, it wasn't overly complex. So that kind of just goes to show, like, maybe sometimes your first attempt, you're not going to knock it out of the park, but keep going, right? Because this is what led to Doors of Trithius.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that like the shift to turn-based gameplay really works. It would be weird if Doors of Trithius was like a real-time had real-time combat.
It would be.
It would probably, I mean, it could be interesting, but I mean,
you wouldn't have that time to think. You wouldn't have that same feeling of like, oh, it's almost like a chess match, or the tactics sort of goes away into more of this like, oh, move quick. Yeah, I think it does serve it really well. This looks great too. Love the UI here and the little icons and some of those machines, like you said, which ended up in our temple.
Yeah, and I mean, like the one machine, sort of the one concept that really did make the jump fairly successfully was like, what was going to be, what was rather this security droid, and there were a few other concepts, and this sort of like ball-footed Gatling gun armed thing was the one that the one that I think that you that you rightly liked best,
We had to pull out the Gatling gun though. We had to take that away.
Oh yeah. I mean, more appropriate for now to have like a harpoon and like a morning star. But just like the the character sprite, or like the the main character, this also had to be capable, of course, of 8-directional movement and aiming, and that really does sort of like dramatically increase the scope and sort of the demands from like an art asset generation perspective. It's like having to put so much more effort into making all these different frames of animation really does kind of slow down the process
too much. And to me, there's a decision to be made between like quality and fidelity and amount of content, and like the amount of work. Even there you can see like the lighting up of when he shoots his gun. It's so cool, so much detail. But if we're doing this, we're never going to get to 200 creatures, 300 creatures, well, with like unique abilities, which is really what I want. I want to surprise players. I want to give this thing new every time they play, and very hard to do with a character this complex.
Well, for sure. I mean, as far as sort of like the complexity of like a-directional movement and like mouse aiming and real-time combat, the fact that like the scope of the game gets a lot more manageable with that shift to like turn-based, tile-based movement. It's sort of the same way with with the art. It's like you don't have the same sort of requirements in like a turn-based sort of roguelike as you do for like a real-time action game. It's like a much more sort of manageable project for for what is a small team. If you had like a a team of artists that were capable of just pumping this stuff out, then it would be different. Or if you had like multiple programmers that each could be, put on like a specialized task, that would be different. But it's important to sort of keep things manageable.
But I also want to. It's also good to recognize like the amount of, like, that's a great looking sprite. Like, I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, and all the concept art. I know a lot of the artwork you do a concept art beforehand. Maybe you could speak a little bit about how that works into your process. I always found that quite fascinating. I love showing off this concept art on the website and on the Steam board.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, when possible, it's nice to be able to take like a minute and just like produce a little thumbnail sketch. I mean, even just something as sort of messy as this, for the sake of getting something done really, really quick. I mean, I can just sort of go straight into like pixels. But when there is an opportunity, it is nice to be able to sort of like work out some ideas like this, and it's also like a lot easier than to sort of get feedback. I can show these to you, see which idea you like best, and then it can be developed from there. It's like a lot faster from the perspective of just trying to like make changes and like develop an idea, to be doing it when it's just like pencil and pen on paper, as opposed to like necessarily making like radical changes to a completed sprite model.
And do you have the concept art also, like, open while you're working? Like, do you open it on like a monitor and you're referencing it?
Yeah, usually.
Okay.
Or I'll just have my, my sketchbook like open sort of beside me to kind of refer to, but I'll usually have something open to kind of refer to. And there is a fair bit of concept art that has been also done up for Doors of Trithius, like the monsters especially. It's sort of like handy to be able to kind of figure out roughly how they could be posed, and even if all these details can't really be translated into a relatively compact sprite, having them here in the concept art to sort of inform certain things does still make a difference. Some of these enemies are definitely like much more detailed than they might appear sort of, in their sprite form.
But I could see the pose coming through for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like there's like enough of it is kind of like brought over.
Do you have the art for these guys? Maybe we could show the before and after. I thought these bugs just came out so fantastic, and that's one you just recently made.
Oh yeah, let's see. I didn't actually select those for the showcase.
So we're sending you on a hunt here.
Yeah, but
let me also say, like, I think that's one thing as an artist, Trevor, you do really well is these active poses, because we don't have like an attacking stance and then a walking stance. And so I noticed like you always seem to come up with like a little bit of an angle or a movement, so it's like it works for everything. It looks like the creature's about to move or he's in the process of movement. And I think that active stance is so effective. Okay, there we go. Nice.
The illusion. Yeah. So here is, I'm not sure if these are quite the final versions, but yeah, so we've got these two new bugs for the for the factory floor. These crystal thieves. So yeah, big nasty sort of millipede looking thing. Well, I mean, not really a millipede, more just like a vicious man.
Like half and half almost millipede versus some other beetle thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and something that there's a some kind of distant relative over here, more like a beetle, but yeah, I mean, and they have, of course, their own nest. So this is sort of how they ended up turning out, and I think they sort of look reasonably authentic.
They look great.
Kind of tell.
Absolutely, you can tell. Yeah. And then I'll also say sometimes the gameplay comes after the art. Sometimes I have an idea for gameplay, and then you'll make art off that. But in this case, I'm looking at those characters, and it changed what their abilities are going to be. And players will see that in game once these beetles get added. But you look at them, and they kind of have their own feeling. They kind of take on their own life. You gotta give them abilities to match what they are.
That's right. I guess you don't really some things you can't really know until you see them. But yeah, I mean, like all of these these concepts do have sort of corresponding sprites, except for these guys. These are sort of concepts that haven't quite been worked yet.
They're in the queue. They're yeah.
Yeah, but they're there, sort of ready to be sprited.
There's a lot more biomes and realms coming, but yeah, the Ravager, so iconic. This is was just perfect. I'm like so happy with how he came out.
Yeah, it's a pretty terrifying situation to be stalked by one of these guys. It's also sort of fun in that respect that, like, the fact that like the Doors of Trithius is like a somewhat unconventional fantasy world, and that you can have these slightly more almost kind of like sci-fi elements that are, of course, like tailor-made for like a medieval fantasy world. It's not like these are extraterrestrials, but there's a little more room, it feels like, to create these more outlandish creatures and not be and not be restricted to sort of the standard fantasy tropes. Like some kind of like a crazy species of creatures that feeds on blood and like creates a cocoon and that then hatches this terrible, speedy hunter creature. Like that's not really what you typically run into when exploring a derelict dungeon, which is, I think, pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely inspired
like
a bit by Alien and sci-fi elements, but you're totally right. Like this world we're building definitely has room for a lot of inspiration and different elements to come under this one umbrella of this fantasy world with all these creatures and magic and vile beasts from other dimensions. And that Ravager, he's so big. You packed him into one tile because there's like only so much room in a tile-based game. They have to sort of fit on a tile, and that is one larger restriction, I'd say, is tile-based games. And this guy's got to look huge. He's got to be looming, and that came through really well with how he looks in the final version.
Let's see. I think I have a little demo of like the cocoon doing its thing. Oh, here we go.
Oh, there he is. Yeah.
So I think this might be close to the final sprite, but yeah, veiny and bloody and like gross. I think it's pretty fun.
And these turn into a faction now. This is like in the game code, and that's known as the Blood faction. So possibly some new blood creatures coming in the future to join them as well.
Well, that's just extra terrifying, like a whole sort of like society of these like blood drinking creatures.
Yeah, what do? They have politics. They have like we'll have to find out.
Yeah. It's like a lot of room for lore here. How do they prioritize who gets the first drink of the blood?
What's their tax policy?
Yeah.
They're great.
Blood tax.
Blood. Yeah, that is what it is. It's a blood tax.
Yeah. But
like
basically there's sort of like like mock-ups and working files for basically every everything.
Obviously, yeah, all these little details.
It has to start somewhere.
Yeah, you did the UI. The game looks so flat and monocolored. The UI really brought it to life. Yeah, the little torches are just great. There's some more animation still to be added to the game, like the torches they hold in their hands isn't quite in yet. This isn't quite in yet either. Some of the animated textures, the engine's trying to keep up with the art in this case. Yeah, this is so much art. How does it feel seeing all your art coming to life in this game, just like growing and growing, and know that like you played like such a huge part in bringing this world to life?
Well, it's it's a lot of fun to sort of see it all come together, and just to sort of know that. Well, I mean, I think like the most important thing as far as like game art is concerned, like at its base, is that the art not be an impediment to somebody's ability to enjoy the game. It's like not everyone's going to like every art style. Some people are going to be just turned off by the fact that a game has pixel art. I know that there are some people that are on somewhat of like a crusade against these sorts of more kind of deliberately retro looking games. But assuming that a person can just sort of accept the art style, as long as the art isn't getting in the way of them having a good time, then, that's some kind of a small success. And then, then there's sort of the potential then for the art to actually like elevate the experience, and really kind of like sell the atmosphere along with, the sound design and, and sort of like the world building and all that, it's just just a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've had really good feedback so far on the art and the aesthetic. I guess I'll ask you, trying to keep this around 30 minutes, I'll ask you, would you have any advice for other pixel artists trying to get into it, or maybe considering doing pixel art? Like how would one get started with pixel art or start learning to do work like this?
Well, really it's just a question of just getting started, find a like an art program that you have a reasonably easy time kind of getting to work for you. There's a lot of options out there for pixel art specifically if you want to go that direction. I use like an old version of Photoshop that I've got like an old license for, but like a program like GIMP is perfectly fine. A sprite is like probably the most popular one these days for for indie game for people working on indie games. But like the number one thing really I would say is just to try plopping some pixels down, see if you can make something that looks halfway decent. And even if it doesn't look halfway decent, whatever, just try it. And especially it helps to like take a really close look at some of your favorite, pixel art games and just see kind of what they're doing to kind of like get the point across, because there's a lot of techniques that have been developed over the last, say, like the decades that it's been since the very earliest sort of arcade and computer games. Like the art form has become much more sort of developed and refined. There's like a lot of things that artists tend to be able to do now that that techniques that weren't even really explored back in like the early 80s to sort of like make things look a lot smoother and have a lot more volume and sort of avoid sort of the flatness that you see in so many old games, which can now just sort of be like a style if you want to go that direction. But anyways, to sort of get back on topic, I mean, for someone that wants to get started doing pixel art, just start, just start.
Yeah.
Especially if you want to pair that with fooling around with some kind of like game development tool and just sort of try to get your art moving around. Make like a simple environment, make like a simple character sprite, and just try to see how it all feels in motion, because that's very motivating. The most important thing to try to develop any kind of a skill really is to stay motivated. And if you're pairing your practice in pixel art with developing your skills as sort of like a rudimentary game developer, then both of these things will sort of feed the other, and it'll keep you going. That would be my advice. That's at least how I did it.
What a fantastic answer. Yeah. Like you were saying, like find a tool, zoom in close on art you love, concept art where it makes sense, and then that understanding that difference in how pixel art now has so much more depth versus this like flat sort of look in the past. Was there any art that really inspired you in your journey in learning and building your skill set?
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. I mean, actually, like my desktop wallpaper tends to just be like an endlessly like rotating sort of series of like atlas maps, where it's like sort of the entire sort of game world of a given game just kind of like laid out, in like a big map, just to sort of get inspiration of some of my favorite games. But like one of the big ones would definitely be like say Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I think that game has just some of the most distinctive like sort of world like map environment art of any game. It's awesome. Also, like a game like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, probably one of the most artistically accomplished games of all time, really. Those two are probably the games that I sort of like look to the most as far as trying to like draw inspiration, especially for something that's really moody and sort of higher detail, like the Doors of Trithius, where there's a game like Symphony of the Night really just sort of like shows you that you can basically pack almost like infinite detail into like a little throwaway part of the background, and someone's going to notice it and someone's going to appreciate it.
Or your unconscious mind will, like it adds, all little bits add up. And that's something I've been learning. Like we recently started adding, you see those clumps of dirt on the ground and other little touches once these start to pile up, all that detail, you're so right. It really adds to the scene. I think it's one reason why this temple looks really good. Just all the detail and the texture and, like you say, the moodiness.
Yeah, for sure. Like all of these things just kind of, you reach almost like a critical mass of sort of, becoming a convincing environment when all these things are sort of, all kind of present and working together. And, like the very best sort of examples of games with really good art, I think, do that. There's just like everything is sort of in concert. It all just works and feeds into like a common cause. But yeah. I mean, I guess. Anyways, there are really too many. There are too many games that I sort of like adore the art for to really go into. But those two are ones that I sort of think of all the time when looking for sort of inspiration for Doors of Trithius.
That's a great answer.
Link to the Past, especially like the Dark World, of Link to the Past, and just sort of Symphony of the Night. Just awesome art.
Well, I think that's a great answer. I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Trevor, for joining me today. Maybe we got to do this again. I feel like there's so much we could get into with the art, and maybe talk about some of the upcoming biomes as we get started with them. and like how that art is developing. But I'll just say thank you for joining me today, and thank you for all your effort to bring the Doors of Trithius to life.
All right. Well, it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun talking with you, Jake. We rarely have face-to-face chats, so it's something of a treat in that regard. And yeah, I would definitely be down to do this again.
Yeah, awesome. I think this went great, and I guess we'll see you next time.